The Michigan Man Podcast, episode 185. A disappointing season ends with a clunker at the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl. That and more on this week's show. This is the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. For Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and a Happy New Year. Welcome to our first show of 2014. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Coming up on our Michigan Game Day segment in just a few minutes, we'll be joined by Michigan beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive to discuss just what happened on Saturday night as the Wolverines were soundly handled by K-State in the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl, which most of us saw. Before that, let's check Wolverine News and Notes for this, the first week of 2014. I think most of us are glad to say good riddance to the 2013 football season. In August, we had high hopes for Team 134, but as the season unfolded, it became increasingly clear that this was an inconsistent team struggling for an identity and battling to overcome injuries and inexperience. We can only hope lessons have been learned and that through a winter of conditioning, spring practice, summer drills, and then fall camp, a more experienced and a better Team 135 will emerge. We have to hope so. There is a lot at stake. We all know this program cannot suffer through another 7-6 season. It just does not cut it around here. Coach Hoke and his staff, as well as the players, have a lot of work to do in the off-season. For this moment, and for the cold months ahead, it will be a winter of discontent in Wolverine Nation, rest assured. Saturday night, we saw Shane Morris step into the starting role at quarterback, and he performed admirably. We were worried that he would be the problem in trying to come away with a victory against K-State, but it turned out that he was really the only ray of light. The offense as a whole struggled mightily. The game plan was again somewhat mystifying, and a defense that for the most part kept Michigan in games this season couldn't get a stop and looked listless. Indeed, it was a disheartening end to a season we'd all like to forget. Michigan beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive was watching it all unfold from his perch in the press box, and then after the game had a chance to talk to the players and hear what Coach Hoke had to say about another disappointing effort. He joins me next on our Michigan Game Day segment here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. Back with us on Michigan Game Day as we wrap up the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl and that disappointing performance over the weekend. Michigan beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive. Welcome back, Nick.
Good to be back, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing okay, thanks. Despite the way the season ended, can't say that I'm shocked, but other than the beautiful weather I'm sure you experienced down there, and from what everyone says was a nice bowl game experience, very disappointing, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it was. Like I said, I'm not shocked that they lost. I don't think anyone really should have been or was, but just kind of shocked in the way they lost. How they competed or how they didn't compete at times, I guess. And they were really never in the game. It was Kansas State got the ball first, went 75 yards in like 7.5 minutes, scores a touchdown. Michigan comes back and Shane Morris leads them down the field and they can't convert on a touchdown, but it's it's 7-3, you're in the game, and then all of a sudden another lengthy drive for a score, and then it never really felt like they were in the game after that. The offense did a few things, not nearly enough, but the defense was really just kind of a mess. I mean, they couldn't keep anybody out of the end zone. They couldn't keep Kansas State off the field. Kansas State could do whatever it wanted. It scored 31 points, but I think it probably could have just called it scored. Kansas State could have done whatever it wanted. So just a very disheartening, I think, performance for them on defense, especially just the fact that they were never really in the football game and never really competed.
Really only one bright spot, so let's start with that. Shane Morris, I guess leading up to the game over the weekend, the question that most Michigan fans were asking is, can Shane Morris handle it? And that seemed to be everyone's focus. But in the end, Shane was the lone bright spot, wasn't he?
I think so, yeah. I think that, he was completed, I think, 79% of his passes in the first half. They didn't ask him to do a ton, anything complicated, and he wasn't perfect. But, he was far from freshman-like, if you will. I mean, he didn't look upset or scared or nervous or anything like that. I think, he stood in there, made some reads, showed off his arm strength and, showed off some stuff that he probably has to work on as well. But, showed that he can compete, for a job, I think, and showed that he's capable in all the areas that you need to be capable in. So I think that was a positive, considering that, in reality, it seemed like to me that, while he got those snaps for a month, it seemed like really only about a week and a half of those snaps were probably, the dead serious, you're probably going to start snaps. I don't think they really knew on Devin until probably 2.5 weeks ago. So, considering the short time and everything else in the turnaround, I think he was fine. He was the least of their problems by far. So he obviously has some things he has to work on, no question. But I think that's definitely a bright spot and a definite positive for them going forward.
There are a lot of things he needs to work on, but some of the takeaways from watching him, I mean, we really haven't been able to see much of him this year, but things that jumped out at me were his patience, good reads. He surveyed the field, which Chris Spielman kept mentioning. He was looking around. And his fundamentals, the one thing you notice about Shane, he gets his feet set, and he does not throw off that back foot.
No, he's a natural. He looked like a natural pocket passer. A guy that has been playing his position his whole life, been playing in this type of offense his whole life, and very the lack of happy feet, I guess. Where he can drop back in the pocket and he stands there and his feet are still, and he's waiting for something to open, and he's looking at other receivers more than just one route. He's not bailing. He's not, a lot of times, and part of what makes Devin Gardner so great is his elusiveness and his ability to get out there and move. But part of Devin's, biggest flaw sometimes is that he doesn't, he'll bail on the pocket and create some sort of pressure that's not really there or shouldn't be there. So, Morris did a nice job of kind of standing in there and, had the internal clock in the head, wasn't hanging on the ball too long, hung on to it too long a few times, but and that was later in the game, I think. But early on, just the timing was there, and he got rid of it. It just looked like a guy that knew what he was doing, and fundamentally just kind of not as raw as maybe you would have think for a guy that young.
No, I think it was very good. We all agree. Nice performance from Shane Morris. Let's talk about the game plan. And, I think a lot of us hate to harp on the game plan. In the first two series, Michigan used a couple of, gimmick reverses, got Shane some throws to make him comfortable. And, I think everyone would say, okay, we get that. But there was no real attempt to establish the running game. Yes, the defense played into that, and we'll talk about that shortly. Mm-hmm. But not only was there no rhythm in the offense, there didn't seem to be any attempt to establish one.
No, I think that Brady claimed that they fell behind. They couldn't, which I don't agree with that. I think that's kind of a cop-out. I mean, you fell behind. You were behind 14-3. That's not exactly 40-0. I mean, you were behind 14-6. I think it was really at the end of the day. So I don't think it was something where you needed to just bail on it and never really try. And they didn't. I think it was they said it was part of their game plan to throw it a lot early in the game and let Shane get comfortable. And that's fine. But at the same time, I mean, you have to have some balance. You have to be able to have a threat of running the football, and there was never one. Maybe instead of a couple of these crazy reverses that go for -5, you just run the ball and see what happens. I mean, you're outthinking yourself again, I think, in a lot of these situations, and it's very interesting to me, and it's very kind of contradictory in a way, because what they claim to want to do on offense is supposed to be very basic. They want to just, they claim they want to run the football between the tackles, and play off some play action, and do some pro style stuff. They don't want to do anything crazy. They don't want to be, one of these up tempo spread teams who are, playing without a huddle, or playing, look to the sideline and read like Ohio State does. They claim they don't want to do any of that. Yet they come out here with, 30 different formations and all these different random, and that seems counterintuitive to me, because if you're trying to be basic and trying to be a time possession, type team who wants to kind of grind the game out, then I don't understand why you do some of the things you do. That to me is the biggest flaw. If we want to talk about game plan and everything else, it's that they kind of contradict themselves on. It doesn't make sense in some ways, because if you were going to be a team that wanted to help your young quarterback, let him get comfortable, you would have tried to run the football. I mean, that's just reality. So, and they didn't, and that's a head scratcher. Another one in a long line of head scratchers in what was a up and down year.
8 running plays, I think it was, in the first half alone. 1 from your stud running backs, Derek Green, a few for De'Veon Smith. Just, it's so hard to understand, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I mean, I think it was 8 carries for the running backs for the game, really, I think, at the end. I think De'Veon had 4, and Derek Green had 1. I think Fitz had 2, and then Justice Hayes had 1 somewhere in there. So that was it. And, some of those were option pitches, which, I don't know. I don't understand why that's still something that's going on. Some of these, an option with, they ran the spread option with Shane Morris, or the read option with Shane Morris is not exactly, he's not Devin. He's not a runner like that. So, I don't know. I mean, like I said, it's so odd that you want to be this basic, simple offense, and you want to do these balanced things and keep it simple and keep it easy for these young guys. And that's what they've talked about, is trying not to overflow them and flood them with stuff they can't understand. And yet you go out here and you do some of this stuff, and it just doesn't. You're overcomplicating. I think you're doing too much, and it's just making it more. It's making it more difficult on you than it is the defense, I think, a lot of times. And that's what we've seen throughout the year, where they're doing things and you can kind of get the idea of what they're doing, but guys just aren't ready for that. And you're hurting yourself, and you're not putting any pressure on the defense, because they're just basically playing base and beating you. So, it's in-game stuff, and it's week-to-week stuff that obviously they're going to have to take a look at, and that's on Brady Hoke, and he's going to have to check it out and see if that's what they want to do going forward.
Well, the offensive line, Nick, pretty good on pass protection. Shane really didn't get flushed much, if at all, so they did a really nice job there, but couldn't get really any push in the running game. But, the more I watched the game on Saturday, and you just talked about overcomplicating things, with this offensive line not getting a lot of push, granted, although there weren't many running plays for them to block, you start to think maybe part of the problem with this young offensive line is the strategy or the game plan isn't straightforward, running the football. They're thinking about maybe, again, just way too much with this game plan.
Yeah, I think that, we don't know really what they were capable of doing in that game on the ground, because they were never really given a chance to show it. And, like we said, they did do a nice job of creating a pocket for Morris and letting him stand in there and make some plays. And, they did a nice job of keeping him, keeping his jersey clean and keeping him off the ground, which had to have been priority number 1, I think. And I think it was. And that's important. That I think that the entire coaching staff went into that game thinking that, if you guys do nothing else, keep him from off the ground and make sure that he doesn't get rattled, or make sure that this doesn't turn into another, situation like what happened with Russell Bellamy, where he was hit so many times early in that series, or first couple series he was out there, that he just looked lost after that. So they did a very nice job of avoiding that from happening, and that was probably priority number 1. But as far as the ground game goes, it never really gave him a chance. You're doing some reverses, you're doing some other things, and you're doing some of the sweeps and this type of stuff, and that's fine. But you never really, only a couple times did you really hand it off and let a guy go up the middle or between the tackles and see if you could push somebody. And there's just too small a sample size to say one way or the other if they were good, bad, or otherwise at that. It just never really existed. So I have a hard time totally coming down hard on them. I mean, the few times that they did run the ball, it really wasn't there. And maybe they thought that they were getting, stalemated, so it really wasn't happening. So I have a hard time really totally crashing down on these guys, because I just don't know if they really had a chance to prove one way or the other if they were going to be able to do anything.
Well, 4 weeks to prepare. Michigan comes up with what, many of us, I think, would say is a disjointed game plan.
Mm-hmm.
Like it or not, that keeps the heat on El Borges, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it keeps the heat on everybody. I mean, I think that some of the excuses you thought you had, or some of the, narrative twists that maybe occurred after the Ohio State game, I just, you had 4 weeks, 3 straight weeks of practice and then another week of recovery time, I guess, right after the Ohio State game, and to come out so listless like that, especially on defense, which was a real head-scratcher, especially after the terrible showing you had against Ohio State. It's just, it makes no sense. And then, offensively, I have a hard time in a way because I think that, Borges, there's part of it that I think he had to scale back what he wanted to do. I think they had to hamstring Shane a little bit because you couldn't just dump everything on him and let him go. So I think that there's something to be said about that. But at the same time, you still overcomplicated things and you didn't allow the running game to help. And, you couldn't get the thing in the end zone early in the game. I mean, if you score a touchdown on one of those first 2 field goals, maybe this is a football game, I don't know. Probably not, with the way the defense seems so uninterested in playing. But really everywhere, I think across the board, and I think, like I've said all year, to me it always goes back to Brady because he's the head coach, and he's the guy who sets the tone, and he's the guy who sets the tone for everyone. And when the team comes out and basically claims they had no energy and weren't ready to go, or we're into it, or whatever it was on defense, I mean, that's all on him. That's his job to make sure that doesn't happen. And, there was, some guys afterward that were pretty honest in that, guys just didn't seem interested in fighting for each other an awful lot this season. And that always goes back to the head coach, and that's his job to make sure that doesn't happen. And that'll be his job to make sure it doesn't happen next season.
Well, let's talk about some of those comments for a minute, Nick, because, not playing for each other, I think it was Frank Clark that made that comment. He said at some point in this season, players, at least some of them, lost the will to fight for each other. And I think most Michigan fans, since they've seen that remark, are probably shocked or at least disappointed to hear that come from a player's mouth. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I think they have every right to be. I think this is football. It's a team game, and you can't win with 8 or 9 guys on each side doing their job and a couple other ones being uninterested. And I just whether it be a small number of people that felt that way or a large number of people that felt that way, doesn't matter. If it's anyone at all that kind of loses the will to do that, then you have problems. And that's, to me, that a lot of that is on your head coach, but a lot of that's also on your seniors and your captains and the guys that need to make sure that doesn't happen. And, try as they will, or try as they did, it just didn't seem like they ever really found a way to get everybody totally on the same page. I think the only time it really happened was the Ohio State game, where it seemed like they really did go out for 60 minutes and they really just said, to heck with everybody else, let's just go play for each other and try to win a football game. And they were right there and they almost did, and you saw the potential of what could have happened. But too many other times it was just, how else would you explain the constant one side up, one side down? If the offense was great, the defense wasn't. If vice versa, it just never really seemed to be on the same page. Nothing ever seemed to be on the same page, in all 3 phases. And, this team seemed like it got along well enough and all those types of things, but at the same time, that's not always everything. So, if they've got issues there, they need to take care of them, and that's something that will fall under the leadership, both the coaches and the players next year, the seniors and the captains and whoever are elected. They're going to have to, do their part to make sure that doesn't happen again, and maybe this will be learned as a lesson, and then they go forward and use it from that.
Nick, one of the other comments after the game that bothered me, this is one of these comments where you wish some of these guys didn't talk to the media. Raymond Taylor saying the defense just wasn't into the game. And, you're thinking, are you kidding me? Mm-hmm. It's a bowl game. It's for your seniors, for your pride. Totally unacceptable that you can say you just aren't into it.
Yeah, that's a head-scratcher. I don't understand that. That was one where, when it was said, I just kind of, I asked why. And that was my first response, and it was just, I'm not real sure. And I just thought, wow, that's, that can't happen. That goes back to me, or that goes back, in my opinion, to what, a guy like Frank Clark says. If you're not into it, that means that, maybe other guys were and you weren't, I don't know. But, for it to be this late in the season, these guys went through a lot this year. Let's not kid ourselves. They went through a lot of, if you go 7-5 at a place like this, it's a lot worse than going 7-5 at a lot of other schools. They go through a lot of stuff. They get a lot of heat from a lot of people that have no idea what's going on. A lot of fans get angry, and now today with social media and everything else, they have every way to voice their opinion and throw some of this stuff in these kids' faces, and a lot of it's wrong and it's not right. And I think a lot of it wears on kids, and I think it, with a young football team especially, it's hard to shield them from some of that. And I think that at the end of the day, what you saw Saturday was a pretty frustrated football team who at some point along the way during that game realized it wasn't going to go their way, just wanted to get out of there and wanted to have this over with and wanted to kind of hit restart and get going again. And I think that, for whatever reason, this team, that the season just, they couldn't get it fixed, and everything else comes on top of it. I mean, it's hard to play football here. It's hard. It's not as easy as people want to think it is, that you just walk in here and all of a sudden you're going to win 10 or 11 games. And that's what everyone expects. And when that doesn't happen, obviously people are mad, and it's hard to deal with all that. And I think there's some of these young guys that kind of weighed on them, and I think it got to be too much at times. And that's part of growing up. That's part of dealing with life. I mean, that's being an adult. People are going to criticize you, and I mean they're in a spot where it's pretty high profile. So it'll be interesting going forward. I know that some of them will learn a great deal from it, and other ones will have to decide if they want to learn a great deal from it, and that'll just be the lesson and kind of the mantra going into next season.
With us on Michigan Game Day as we wrap up the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl and loss on Saturday, Michigan beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive. Nick, let's talk about the defense for just a couple of minutes. K-State did what they wanted to on offense, and that started with the fact that they completely blew the D-line off the ball. It didn't matter who Madison ran in the rotation. They just could not get anything stopped.
Yeah, that surprised me, and it surprised me against Ohio State as well. Because, I know Ohio State had a great offensive line. Kansas State did too. Let's not give them any short sides here. Kansas State was a veteran group. They want to run the football, and they do a very good job of it. But surprised me that they, in the last two outings, the defensive line was kind of physically manhandled as bad as they were, because I thought that group was really coming along. I thought by the time, the Iowa game came, I think they wore out in the Iowa game, but I think throughout most of that week and, in the weeks leading up to it, they did a really nice job of keeping the defense in the game and making sure that, and keeping the team in the game, in some of those instances, in late November. And I thought they were coming along. I thought they were turning a corner, and I guess I was wrong, because, it was really, the same kind of deal with Kansas State as it was with Ohio State, where they were really just getting blown off the ball. They were getting rooted out of their spots. They weren't keeping any gaps, and they were, all of a sudden you turn around and they're getting, caught in the wash, and there's huge cutback lanes, and there's just gashes up the middle. Some of those scrambles from Jake Waters, who was a terrific player, by the way. I mean, Jake Waters, he was very impressive, way more than I thought he would be. But some of those scrambles that he rips off, I mean, that's, you're not keeping contain on guys, you're letting huge things break, and you're not getting off blocks, and that's really the key thing. So that was surprising, and, obviously it has to be disappointing for Greg Madison and for Brady Hoke, because that's their, those two guys, that's their spot. They're the ones that, are teaching those guys every day. So that can't be good, and that can't happen. I mean, for Michigan to play football under this coaching staff the way they want to do it, the defensive line has to be one of the best positions on the field. And, that's just how, we can sit here and criticize game plan and think we would do something different or whatever. But to me, a lot of that becomes moot, because that's fine, but here's what they are doing. What they are doing is they're trying to control the clock, and they're trying to have their defense kind of lead the way. But if their defense is getting pushed around like that, you can't win football games that way. So that something has to change there, and I'm sure that'll be maybe priority number one going in the offseason, or one of them anyway, is to get that defensive line fixed or get them back on track at least, because they did do some positive things this year.
Well, the linebacker play, some of their misery, no doubt, was because of the defensive line play in front of them. But for a unit that's very talented, and they've been a bright spot for most of the year, I think we all agree on that, their play was inexplicable too. Chris Spielman mentioned during the game, it wasn't just James Ross or Bolden, but it was Jake Ryan and Desmond Morgan too. So many times they took bad angles. They weren't shedding blocks, not even close to an acceptable performance from a very talented group.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't think I'm alone in saying that I think I probably hold them to a higher standard sometimes when you look at and analyze what they've done, because I think that they are, like I said, they are so talented, and that is the best, the strongest point on the defense, and that is the group that needs to lead and needs to always be there and always be consistent no matter what, because they are very good football players. And, there's no excuse for those guys. And that was probably the most surprising, to find them out of position at times. A guy like Jake Ryan, who's never out of position. I mean, even if Jake Ryan is out of position, he seems to find a way to get back in and make a play. Same with James Ross and even Desmond Morgan. I think all three of those guys at times, and then even some of the backups, I think they all had a really, really good year, considering, everything else that was around them. And to finish like that had to have been very disappointing, because they're better than that, I think, is the end result there. And that, and that's going to be the group next year, really, that has to lead the way. And at some point, I think Drew DeLeo said it really well after the game. All the off-season stuff is fine. That's very important. For these younger guys, they need to have a great winter, and they need to have a great spring and a great summer and all that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean anything if you're not going to be able to go out on Saturdays and make plays. And by his estimation, not enough plays were made this year, and that was the reason for the 7-5 loss. It had nothing to do with preparation and all those things. It's just when the lights come on, guys are going to have to show up and do something, and they're going to have to turn the corner and make things happen. And I think that's a big part of it. And that defensive, that linebacking crew is going to have to be very consistent next year, and that can't happen again.
I think everyone would agree with that. The secondary, however, is another matter.
Yeah.
Michigan gave up the middle of the field all night again, and the corners, Blake Countess and Raymond Taylor, both got just torched, didn't they?
It seemed to me that was something that kind of was on its way to happening. I think that those two guys do a really nice job of hanging in and competing as much as they can, given their kind of physical, limitations. If we're being honest, Blake Countess is 5'11", 5'10", he's 180 pounds. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He had a massive knee surgery not that long ago. I think he does a terrific job of staying in good position and kind of using his angles and to kind of compete against the fact that he isn't the most athletic guy in the world. But if you play a receiver like Lockett, who's outstanding, I mean, he's Michigan's version of Jeremy Gallen. He's going to take advantage of that, and he's going to exploit your weaknesses and make you pay. And the same goes for Ray Taylor, who I think did a great job this year of turning around, becoming a better tackler. But at the same time, you're not making all those tackles if you're on the ball and you're ready to knock passes out of there. So those guys, I think, do a really nice job of doing everything they can, but at the same time, I think physically sometimes they're limited. And I guess you look forward and look to the future, and you got some young guys already on the roster in Channing Stribling and Jordan Lewis that aren't as limited physically and athletically. That you hope, I think, if you're Michigan, they take a step forward and can compete for more time. And obviously, if you can, and it seems like it's all but done. Jabril Peppers is on his way here, and if he can come in and be the guy that everybody thinks he is, then that changes a lot too. But at the same time, has to be continuity there, and like you said, up the middle, the safety situation is also interesting because you do lose Thomas Gordon. Jared Wilson was hurt a lot this year, but I still think Jared Wilson's a good football player. I think he'll be fine, but you have to find another safety in the middle, and you're still going to have to find a guy that can kind of get everybody organized. They never really replaced Jordan Kovacs in my mind, and people never really valued him enough in his ability to make sure everybody was in the right position. There's a reason why they didn't give up big plays in 2012, and they did, I think, in 2013. And Jordan Kovacs was a big part of that. And so they're going to have to find a way to get back to that level and find two guys in the middle that can make sure everybody's in the right spot and everybody's on the same page.
Well, in wrapping it up then, Nick, on MLive Monday, you pointed to the 4 questions that face Michigan as the offseason begins. Number 1 was who plays quarterback. Is one solid performance from Shane Morris enough to get a quarterback controversy started?
No, not a controversy. I think it's enough to have a competition. I think it's enough to have a realistic, you go into the spring and I think you say, okay, both you guys are going to get some snaps and show what you can do. And, by the end of the spring, that might be resolved. But I think over the last month, Shane Morris did enough to earn the right to compete. I mean, he's a member of this team. He shouldn't have to just sit there and not even have a chance, if Devin Gardner comes back. And we don't even know if Devin Gardner will be healthy, to be quite honest. So there's a lot that goes into it. I think, I'm not going to say it needs to be a controversy, but I think that, these guys need to compete. And I think that's better for everyone if that happens. So I think that's only a positive if you have two guys that are willing to look at it that way. And I think those two guys are for the most part. So I think that, Shane did enough to make it a competition one way or the other. I don't think he should have to come into the spring and just turn his helmet in for a headset and stand aside and let things happen. I think he deserves the right to compete. He filled in and did everything he was asked of, and competition usually is only a good thing for two guys that buy into it and are ready to go with it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, the second point or question that you made, Nick, was that you have to fix the secondary. A lot of players coming back with experience, a tough experience, but there's not maybe a shutdown corner in the returning group, or maybe even what we would consider a stud-free safety in this group. So big question marks to be answered there, Nick.
Yeah, and a lot of that's going to have to do with development, and and a lot of it, honestly, you're waiting on seeing what Jabril Peppers can give you, and development in guys like DeMonte Thomas, guys like Stribling and Lewis. Those three guys, notably, Jeremy Clark's in there as well. Some of the younger guys that have the physical gifts that you look for, and Delano Hill's another one. They've got a lot of guys that they brought in over the last 2 years that are, big physical defensive backs, and those guys are going to have to turn into contributing players. And if that happens, I think some of those problems go away. But if it doesn't, you're going to go with the smarter, more polished players, which are Countess and Taylor, and you're going to have to still scheme around that. And that's really what Greg Madison got caught into a lot this year, is he never had a guy that could play on an island and kind of allowed him to be, more aggressive with some of the stuff he does. People just wanted to yell and scream about, why isn't he blitzing? Why isn't he doing this? Well, he's not, because he didn't have corners that could go out there and really just get in people's faces. And you look at Michigan State, Dirk Listenard's the perfect example. There's a reason why Pat Narduzzi can blitz every single snap, and it's because he has a corner who, no matter what, is going to at least compete with your best receiver on every single route. And that takes away one extra guy, and you don't have to play in these soft zones. So I think if you can find one guy out of that group that can be physical and play on an island, then it helps you out an awful lot. It changes an awful lot about what you do on defense.
Well, your third question, Nick, was how do you fix an unacceptable run game? Michigan fans have never experienced the kind of futility in the running game that we saw this year. The fact that we have so many talented and highly touted linemen makes it even harder to swallow. There has to be a huge leap forward from this group, doesn't there, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, it can't be anything but a massive step forward. You have to, they've claimed that all the stuff they've gone through this year is stuff that's going to help them. Well, that has to be true. You have to, one way or the other. And I talked about the defensive line being the number one priority. Really, I think the number one priority for the entire football team is the offensive line and the running game. That has to be fixed by any means necessary. And I don't know how you do it, or I don't care how you do it. I mean, I'm not a football coach. That's up to them. So, those guys have got to be better. You can't have a season like that again where you're so one-sided and your quarterback gets hit on every single snap and everything, all this sort of stuff happens. You can't do it. And, there's too much talent on that offensive line for it not to be good. There's too much talent in your own backfield for those guys not to have a chance to be good. And, really too much talent everywhere else. I mean, you have really talented football players on offense that don't have a chance to do much because you can't block anybody. Devin Funchess and Devin Gardner and Gallen will be gone, but I mean, there's a lot of ability there that just kind of went wasted in a lot of ways because you couldn't block, and that just can't happen because everything starts and stops there, as we know, and that's the basis of every single offense, no matter if you're a pass-heavy team or a run, whatever. I mean, your offensive line has to be the group that starts it. And for Michigan, that didn't happen enough this year. And if it happens again, then this will happen again, obviously, or even worse.
And your last question was who leads in the locker room? And many fans don't realize, I think, how important it is to have strong leadership in that locker room, especially from your seniors. And on the heels of this just very disappointing season, finding those leaders and finding them fast is going to be really vital to next season's success, isn't it?
Yeah, and especially in football. I think we talk about other sports a lot. Basketball, I don't think it's as big of. I don't think it's as big a deal. But football, you have so many moving parts, and there's 85 guys on scholarship. There's 100-some guys in total. Guys that all have their own personalities and their own, likes and dislikes and agreements and whatever else. And and it's so hard sometimes to get everybody to get going on one common page. And to me, that everybody likes to point at the head coach, and obviously that's his job too to make sure that happens. But he can't be in every single spot. He can't be, he can't be everywhere all the time. I mean, this has to fall onto a group of people that are strong enough with their peers, that have enough respect among their peers, and are confident enough in themselves to stand up and say when enough's enough, and make sure that everybody's going to the same spot. And it's not easy at all. It's very, very difficult. I thought 2 years ago in 2011, I thought they had the right mix there. I thought they had the perfect, group of players. The three captains were David Moult, Kevin Koger, and Mike Martin, and then Ryan Van Bergen wasn't a captain, but he was a very vocal, senior who they'd all gone through a lot. They'd all dealt with a lot of stuff, and they all had enough respect from the locker room, and I think they all had enough confidence in themselves to kind of stand up and make sure that didn't happen again. And that's not easy. That's not easy to have, but it's hard for me to believe that of 100-some guys, there's not 3 or 4 of them in there that, can't be like that. And you got to find those people, identify them, and those people have to step up and identify themselves and, kind of lead this football team, and it's up to them. They're the guys who play. At the end of the day, they're obviously the coaches are putting them in spots and calling the plays, but those are the ones out there making plays. So they have to be the ones that do it, and nobody else can do it for them.
Well, a disappointing season has come to a disappointing end, and we have some time to think about it now and get ready for the recruiting season, which is ongoing, and then get ready for spring ball. So we have a lot to talk about and start looking forward to next year. So, Nick, thanks for the many times during the season that you came on to join us here on Michigan Game Day, and we'll be sure to get you back right around spring and talk about what you think and the future of this team.
All right, sounds good, Mike.
Thanks again to Michigan beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive for being our guest on Michigan Game Day. Coming up next, Wolverine Quick Hits as we wrap it up for our first show of the new year here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue, Michigan Wolverine. On Wolverine Quick Hits this week, Coach John Beilein and the boys get the Big Ten season started tomorrow night with a trip to Minnesota. They'll take an 8-4 record into that contest. It will be an interesting season, and one that will not include preseason All-American forward Mitch McGary. It was announced last week that Mitch would be undergoing back surgery to repair his nagging injury. No one is quite sure what that injury is, but it really doesn't matter. He is more than likely lost for the season. Coach Beilein said McGary is eligible for a medical redshirt, but is not ruling out the possibility he could return later in the season. It would seem highly unlikely, though. So the team has to move forward in the Big Ten without their big man. John Horford and Jordan Morgan will both be counted on to fill the gap left by McGary's absence. There is still a lot of talent on this team, and starting tomorrow night against the Golden Gophers, we'll see if they can get the conference portion of the schedule started with a big road victory. In other news, freshman guard Sierra Thompson led all scorers with 20 points, while junior guard Nicole Elmblad added 16 points as Michigan's women's basketball team claimed a 76-31 victory over Alcorn State on Saturday inside Chrysler Center. Senior forward Val Driscoll had a career day, tying a career best with 11 rebounds to go along with a career-high 7 blocks. Freshman guard Paige Rakers was a key contributor off the bench, scoring 11 points, 6 of which came in a 1-minute and 9-second stretch in the second half. The Wolverines will open Big Ten play on Sunday against Ohio State down in Columbus. The game will start at 5 p.m. and be televised by the Big Ten Network. Heading into league action, the Wolverines sport a record of 9 wins against 4 losses. In hockey news, Steve Racine made 37 saves, but the University of Michigan hockey team fell 3-0 to Michigan State on Saturday in the consolation game of the 49th Great Lakes Invitational at Comerica Park. Leading 1-0 after a goal early in the opening period of play, the Spartans scored twice midway through the third period to put the game out of reach. Matt Berry took a diagonal pass from Jake Chelios and beat Racine over the glove at 7:32 of the third period to put Michigan State ahead 2-0. At 13:52, Brett Darnell's shot from the slot deflected off the skate of Kevin Clare past Racine between the pads to give the Spartans a commanding 3-goal lead. The Wolverines were outshot 40-29 on the night, but held a 15-13 shot advantage in the third period. U of M had 3 shots on goal on a late power play opportunity, their only one of the game, as Michigan State goaltender Jake Hildebrand, who had 29 saves, kept Michigan off the board for the shutout. The Wolverines had not been shut out since a 4-0 loss to Michigan Tech on December 29, 2012, in a GLI semifinal. Michigan has completed non-conference play and will return to Big Ten action on January 10th through the 11th, with a 2-game set at Wisconsin. The Wolverines were number 3 heading into last week's action and have a record of 10 wins, 4 losses, and 2 ties as they return to Big Ten play. As we remind you each week, don't forget to become a member here at GBMW. Visit www.gbmwolverine.com and sign up for membership today. It will be a busy winter with basketball, hockey, National Signing Day right around the corner, and yes, plenty of football chatter. So become a member today at www.gbmwolverine.com and stay in the loop. If you get the show from iTunes, please take a minute to comment or review the show for us. Thanks in advance for doing that. Now that Christmas is over and many of you have your new tabs and phones, don't forget you can get our show app and listen to us anytime you want. Our Android app is available at Amazon.com and, of course, the iTunes Store if you have an Apple device. You can also listen for free by downloading the apps for Stitcher Radio at www.stitcher.com or TuneIn Radio at www.tuneinradio.com. Coming up next week, we're going to put the 2013 football season to rest and talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the future of Michigan football. We'll also start to focus on basketball, hockey, and recruiting in the coming weeks. So as I've been reminding you, we don't go away after football season. There is always something to talk about, and we will be here each week with what we believe is the best podcast coverage available covering Michigan athletics. Make sure you tell your friends about the show, and don't forget to join us each week. That's it for our first show in 2014. Again, thanks for listening, and Happy New Year. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until next week, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for listening to the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. You can find us on the web at www.gbmwolverine.com. That's www.gbmwolverine.com. For audio posts or other fan feedback, please call our listener line at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Email fan feedback to the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan. The Michigan Man Podcast is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!